You are tuned into the Constructionist Podcast, and tonight we are giving just basic thoughts on what we've learned this week. Sharia has a topic, Jake has a topic, and I have a topic, and we're just going to go for it tonight in an open thinking space and material that each one of us have studied separately, but we're just going to come together and have a discussion. Now, at The Constructionist, we encourage a worldview that is built on the principles of Christ. And in this episode, we are going to examine 3 different topics through a clear and honest lens. Now, by doing so, we hope to offer insights. We hope to offer perspectives that if you face these topics, you will be able to expand your own journey towards a greater understanding through love and compassion for yourself and others. So we want to assure you that we're not making and fabricating up anything in this episode, as many have done in theology about information and ideas and coming from different perspectives. They're not necessarily perspectives. They're just fake ideas. So we're not giving fake ideas tonight. Our goal is to provide an honest and authentic perspective in our examination. So this is our thinking space where we're presenting some topics, and tonight we're making our best attempt to explain theology to live by. So if you enjoy the Constructionist Podcast and want to support us financially, please follow the link in the chat or show notes on the social media platform you're listening to and visit our Give page. You can support us through our Patreon page at The Constructionists, and your support will enable us to continue producing high quality content like this. But more importantly, we want to hear from you, engage with you. We believe that through interactions and discussions with listeners like you, we can continue to learn and grow together. So we value your feedback, questions, ideas, and we're excited to build a community around the shared exploration, what we call a communal hermeneutic. So please don't hesitate to reach out to us and let us know what you think. All right, Sharia, Jake, welcome. Thanks for joining. We took a couple of weeks off and now we're back at it with just some general topics, because we've had actually a couple of weeks where we ended Easter, we got through Easter, we ended Lent, we ended Holy Week, we got to the other side, we were able to eat sugar again and chocolate, and we get to the other side, and now we spent a couple of weeks just thinking about different things to talk about. We've learned some things, we've read some things, and we just want to share 3 totally disconnected ideas that have really no relationship with one another besides the relationship that the 3 of us share across this screen. That's it. So Shreya, bring up the first topic. We did some pre-work, so we know what it is. We have some things to ask you about it, but hopefully this is a rich conversation on your topic. So go for it.
Yeah. So this week I went back and re-listened to an old podcast episode, and it was an interview with an author by the name of Devin Price, and Devin Price wrote a book called Laziness Does Not Exist.
This wasn't our podcast, though, correct?
Correct.
I don't remember doing that. Got it. Okay.
No, I don't go back and listen to our old episodes. That feels
sad.
weird.
You just move on. Laziness does not exist. Now, when you first said that, it hit me wrong, because I'm like, well, laziness does exist. But tell me why it doesn't exist.
So the idea is that laziness is more often an expression of an unmet need. So when we perceive someone as being lazy, it's really easy to write it off as a character flaw. They're just a bad person. But if we view laziness as an expression of an unmet need, then that's an invitation for us to support the other person. So it's both a relationship into, or an invitation into relationship, which is really beautiful, but also doesn't let us off the hook for just dismissing that person as flawed.
Got it. So laziness, or the question then is laziness real, or is laziness a response, right?
Or is laziness not living up to the expectation of production in ways that are culturally accepted?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the interview went on to talk about how over the decades, there have been studies on American workers, and people work for maybe 4 to 5 hours of their 8-hour workday.
Okay.
And there's tons and tons of research and materials that go into trying to make people more productive so that they're actually using all 8 of those hours. But if that's not what humans are designed to do, like if it's not what we can do, then doesn't it make more sense to create systems that actually work with how humans really function?
Okay. So maybe
So,
it's the system around the person that is creating the perception.
right.
The system around the person that's not meeting a need creates a perception of laziness. Am I getting it
Yeah.
kind of right?
Well,
Okay.
and even our own perceptions of ourselves, right? How many of us have a hard time sitting still and not doing anything because we feel like we're supposed to be productive?
Okay. So I have listened to podcasts, studies, read studies on the neuroscience of our function. And all of us, no matter who we are, sometimes we get into the rut of feeling like we feel fear, we feel anger, or we feel a sense of laziness. I'm lazy. So laziness many times is a self-identified, feeling, I guess. And sometimes
What
I
feels
think it can
different about that, like the other things you listed, feeling angry, like that's an
yeah,
emotion, whereas
right.
feeling lazy is a judgment.
True, true. I mean, I guess I said that lighter than like analyzing those things together. So I didn't mean to like marry those things or line them up on a target range to like punch in. What I meant was we get into the rut of feelings, and maybe that's the judgment. I'm not matching up. I'm not doing enough. I'm not this. I'm not that. But I wonder what's happening neurologically and like with our neurotransmitters, what is happening when we get into those, I guess, other functioning or dysfunctional kind of states of mind.
One part that they talked about in the interview is that we need to daydream. We need to waste
Okay.
some time that's necessary for healthy brain function and for creative problem solving. So even if our brain isn't like on
Mhm.
100%, it's still working in the background, and we still need that time to allow our brain to process in the background.
Yeah.
Right.
Does
I
the
think
interview also talk about like neurodivergent folks that are oftentimes deemed lazy because it's just common for us to view people like that as lazy, like they're not producing enough.
Right. It doesn't, but what is kind of interesting, so I believe it was after publishing this book, the author was then diagnosed with autism. Um,
okay.
and so their current work is now centering around those ideas and looking
Yeah.
at autism and productivity and
Interesting.
fitting into society and all of that. So more to come.
Mhm. So maybe the motivation of the book or his first research was possibly because of what he's been accused of or what he's been feeling like or judging himself as.
Yeah, they
Yeah.
do share a story of being a workaholic and being one of those people who really thrives in hyper productivity environments and then ends up
Right.
crashing. Um,
Mm.
so even the folks who do function really well can only do so for a short period of time.
Right. So there are, I think, chemicals in the brain that
There are.
that do have influence on some of
especially
this.
too.
Well, you have dopamine,
Mm-hmm.
which helps us to feel like motivated, to like a desire to pursue, to accomplish, type of thing. But then our adrenaline, the adrenal um, chemical, the adrenaline chemical, definitely is that chemical of endurance. And so I can't remember who wrote the book Endure, but it makes me think of that, just the endurance that we are sometimes required to have, like in parenting or in,
Hmm.
like difficult crises when like the world is, like crashing around us, whatever that looks like for the individual's world that's crashing around them. Um, or if there's an actual like crisis of some kind, that adrenaline is keeping that going, is keeping that person like almost in an
Mm-hmm.
agitation, um, that leads to endurance. Like, I got to get this done. I got to get this done. Then you got serotonin, which makes us feel happy and grateful and feeling good about maybe our accomplishment. Maybe there's a reward there. And then the focus, the acetylcholine, the focus chemical of trying to stay focused on the goal. And I think in a world that where we've diagnosed a lot of people with a lot of things, right? Um, where you can have your opinion on whether that's like what your opinion is on it. I'm not going to give my opinion on it because I'm not a counselor and I'm not a psychiatrist, so I don't really get to have an opinion on it. I get to look at research, and what the research tells me. And when I read research about it, I just wonder, like, since we're all behaving in different ways and certain people are being diagnosed and other people aren't being diagnosed, maybe some person's diagnosed with ADHD, another person is diagnosed with depression. I've seen some people go in with just a lack of motivation and then they're diagnosed with depression, or somebody goes in and they're just maybe slightly like they can't figure out distraction, and then they're diagnosed with ADHD, right? And all of those around them could be seen as the judgment call of like, well, you're lazy,
Hmm.
Mm-hmm.
right? There's so many studies right now. I wish we would explore more food, um, how it relates to energy and brain, how our timing, light. I'm sure Andrew Huberman has a few things to say about this, but light and sunlight and just light at night and all of that, what that does actually in shaping and transforming our brain. So I think that there might be a lot of that going on
Mm-hmm.
as well that complicates the discussion.
Hmm.
But I think you're absolutely, the conclusion to that is really spot on. It's like, well, it's laziness. Is it a character flaw or is it a response to an unmet need? After talking
Or is
about it
it
with you,
just
I think,
different than the Western ideal of
Right.
productivity? I think there's more than
yeah,
just either or. It's there's an and of maybe they don't want to produce
Right.
like like our Protestant experiment says they need to. Like we don't. Do we need to have the highest GDP in the world?
right, right,
Do we need to? What is financial success? And so,
well, in some cultures, taking a siesta, a nap break, or taking a break,
Hmm.
in the afternoon is pretty common. And, people looking from the outside, it's like, do you work 8 hours a day? Type of thing. But the idea of that is that they're working into the night
even the
too.
idea of
Right.
8 hours a day, 40-hour work week, Like that's
Right. Well, I mean, some people think in other parts of the world that's a luxury because they're just working day and night. They just take
Right.
shorter breaks through the day.
yeah.
When I
Well,
was
there's that
younger, I was in a foreign country. I was in a very unknown place, and the community, everyone walked really slow.
Hmm.
And I'm like, am I just a fast walker? I would get behind people on like in the streets and stuff, and they would just walk really slow. And I asked somebody, I just asked the family that I was um, working or not working, living with, and they were workers, um, and they walked really slow. And I just couldn't like believe like it just felt like it's like, don't you have places to go and people to see? Let's go. And I think that I actually didn't walk slow. They probably walked very normal. And I walked super fast because I was in this such a hurry, because I had to produce for some
yeah.
reason. I was on vacation and I still had to produce and I
Right.
had to get to my place. Everyone was like on a different time frame than me. It was the strangest thing. But they worked day and night. I couldn't say that they were lazy. They worked day and night really hard. It's unbelievable how much they worked.
I think the world would be a better place if we focused less on productivity and product and more on quality of life.
Hmm.
It'd be a
Yeah.
much better place.
Yeah. Well, and it's also, you're bringing up the difference between like wage work and unpaid work, right? Because you can work for a paycheck, but also you work to maintain your household and yourself.
Mhm.
But then there's other things we do that kind of straddle the line between work and play, right? That aren't productive for the sake of the economy, but are still productive for quality of life or for enjoyment. And that
If
really
your
matters for human flourishing too.
mhm. If your hobbies are more work based, it's a skill, you know. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's the idea of the Japanese work to death called karoshi.
Yeah. Hmm.
That their culture of laziness is rough, and so
Hmm.
um,
Like what they
people
think
are,
of it or what?
of how they function within it, that that they're working so hard that they're
Right.
working themselves right to death.
Got it.
Yeah.
So we definitely get an F minus for our wellness in the United States. And I think that this is that wellness conversation is a part of this conversation. It's like, well, we have this idea of, or this, I guess, consumer idea of laziness or anti-laziness that we have to accomplish some status or some,
Hmm.
marker of expectation.
Hmm.
I think that's a part of it.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other
Thank you.
thoughts on laziness? Or are we just going to be lazy about it? Ha ha.
Uh,
I think
Okay.
that's it for me.
All right. So the question that I have right now is the next topic that we're going over. Um, we've all received these emails. We've all received letters. Why is it? This is my first question because Jake's bringing up the topic of, I don't know what the topic is yet that he's actually going to bring up. But one of our friends received an email. Why is it that Christians need to write letters to get their opinion in the face of others? Is that a human thing or is that a Christian thing? Because I don't see human beings in general just sitting down. I see them tweeting little, brain farts.
I think
But I
depending
don't.
on if it's academia, I think that yes, there are essays and responses
Yeah.
written.
I do think it's a human thing, because if you go to the comment section of any somewhat controversial anything, you just see the same stuff.
Who is the
It's
pen
not
is
extra
mightier than
special
the
in
sword?
Christianity.
What?
Who
It's not
wrote-
extra special in Christianity. You don't think?
I don't think so, but I do think within Christianity there is an increased pressure to police our own behavior and everyone else's. So maybe.
I think we have keyboard warriors now,
Yes.
which is a full spectrum. The idea that the pen is mightier than the sword, which comes from the 1800s, which is not that old, but back and forth. Like if you go back to like Luther and the nailing of the theses, that was a common practice, was to nail your topics on the door to talk about them. And so the idea of writing complaint, now you have Yelp and all that
Yeah.
crap. Like no one cares about your opinion
About this cafe or
of
restaurant
your
or
burger. Just leave
Yeah,
them
this is-
alone.
move on from. I know you had a bad burger, but just move
And it's
on.
fine. As somebody with a good standing Yelp review, leave the small businesses alone. Just let them
Just let
leave
it
good
lie.
reviews. Anyways,
Okay, so bring us the topic. Like somebody received a letter that we know that made us all mad, and we're just like,
so we're going to talk about some of the ideas within that letter, but I think an idea of the letter is to posture yourself like a rooster, and it's called like cocky, and so you're gonna, it's called something. I cannot think of the word right now, but like posing as smarter or bigger or more intelligent, just so that the other person will feel so stupid they won't know how to respond, so you're immediately the expert.
Mm-hmm.
And then you start digging through the letter, and you find holes, and you find where they're wrong. You find things that they plagiarize from other people. You find just
It's a word salad.
It's a word salad of posturing yourself to try to be better or holier or bigger, and it's just so unnecessary.
but
As-
I did have a friend. Just to interrupt a little bit, I did have a friend that received a letter once that somebody had taken. It was an anonymous letter. Now, this letter that was received wasn't anonymous, so that's good. But this letter was an anonymous letter criticizing something that he was doing, and he was a pastor, and so it was one of the congregation members. They had taken magazines and they had clipped out letters
Oh, creepy.
out of the magazines like a psycho, right? Like literally like a serial killer type person. They pasted this letter together with the magazines, right? With letters, and basically condemning this pastor to hell.
Saw
false
church or what?
teacher. Yeah, it's like,
Jeez.
yeah, literally
Well, it
like
takes
Saw
so much
5.
time.
So much time.
Who has the
He
energy
received
for
this
this?
letter. He actually preserved it, laminated it.
Oh, framed it.
He thought that he had like reached some upper,
Arrived.
crusty
Yeah,
level
wow.
of life because he had received this letter. He thought he was just, like, this is my Magna Carta. He's like, oh, yeah. Anyway,
Going back to this letter we're talking about, this email, it was a man writing to a woman,
yes,
and so you already
Of
have
course
this
it was.
play.
right.
You already have this play of hierarchy, and the letter basically is why his opinion is the biblically historical viewpoint of and homosexuality.
Right.
Is the main thing. And for some reason, Christians, especially conservative ones, are really focused on sex. Sorry, that's just where they're at. And so reading through that letter, I don't think I agree with any of his points. All of them are a normal argument to make. They just come from a position of hate instead of love. I think we should say that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So I have 5 questions that I come up with from reading this article, and I hope that the receiver of this letter can listen to this and think about some things, because we haven't talked to them about that. We're even doing this right now, so hope it goes okay.
We're not using
first-
names. We're not using context. None of that. Yeah.
So the first idea is there such a thing as a gay agenda? Oftentimes especially Christian nationalists will talk about the nefarious and dark musings of homosexuals to get their way in life, like taking over the American Psychological Association so that the DSM will no longer call homosexuality gender dysphoria or transism gender dysphoria. Is there such a thing as a gay agenda?
No,
So are we answering
absolutely
that?
not. I mean,
Together.
Is
we're
that
going
the
talking-
open question?
That's the first question. I have 5.
Okay. All right.
the gay agenda is to like live.
Okay.
Well, I think there is a gay agenda, but it's different than what like a conservative Christian would call the gay agenda. A conservative Christian would say that the gay agenda is to get a conservative Christian to agree and affirm and just say gay is okay and like write it into law.
Okay.
Right? Let's just simplify it like that. I would say that the gay agenda is to be treated as a human being and equal and a recipient of all rights, just like anybody else, another human being. And so, like, for example, gay marriage. The moment that marriage went into a civil or a societal norm that was accepted, that you could be non-Christian and be married, you could be Buddhist and be married, you could be, in the United States, right? You could be any religion and be married, or you could be non-religious and be married. As soon as that went into, let's call that the secular world, that Christianity would call the secular world, as soon as marriage, like in the United States, was deemed okay by multiple parties, and that probably happened, right at the beginning, you can't refuse that from people.
Everyone.
You have to be,
especially if
treating
there's a
people
taxation purpose put behind
and
it.
law, if it's a law.
And yeah.
Right. So I think that the gay agenda, from my perspective, and what my position of like what I think I would advocate for, and have advocated for with people, is that all people would be treated equal under the law.
I hear it said often that on the gay marriage trail that marriage is a Christian institution.
Which is not true.
That has never been true.
No.
Right.
And it is only because we want to be able to define it, which isn't fair. Marriage is in every culture, in time, throughout all time.
And looks like a lot of different things.
Looks like a lot of different things.
Now, being, me, what I said about gay agenda, is that a reasonable look at that, or because I understand, and Shreya, you might be able to speak into this more because of your work with equitable practices. I think that there is equality practices, but then we have historically and currently marginalized large groups of people in our society. So there needs to be equitable practices engaged in order to help people receive equal treatment and be able to live life equally in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Was there a question in there?
I mean, is that a reasonable, all that I just said, was that a reasonable look at that? And then to add to equality is there needs to be some kind of equitable practice in place as well.
Right.
The
Yeah.
pendulum has to swing.
I get, so for example, we can have equal rights under the law, right? So we're currently in Oregon, and gay marriage is legal, and it's considered a liberal state, and all of that stuff. I know a queer couple who lives in Oregon, and for them, it is an act of activism to publicly display some affection, because one, that hasn't been something that has been safe for the gay community for decades, right. But also because it is their right. And straight couples can do that as much as they want.
Right.
So even though we do technically have equality under the law, where that pendulum swings, I think, is in public perception and
right,
and that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. So the leader brings up, this person that wrote this email, that the DSM, the diagnostic something manual, mm-hmm. Forgive me, it's the manual that psychologists use for diagnosing mental illness.
Okay. And DSM-3 you mentioned.
Yeah, and he brings up the DSM-3, which is published in the 70s, that homosexuals, queers, trans was considered gender dysphoria or mental illness. And the question that we came up with then is mental illness a sin?
Yeah, so any Christian that tries to equate, like if somebody says it's trans dysphoria or it's gender dysphoria, right? If somebody uses that language, what they're referring to is there was an era of time that being a trans person or having thoughts and feelings and perceptions of trans ideas, that was a dysphoria. And in the DSM, it was classified as a dysphoria, mental illness. And so anybody that uses that argument that it's a dysphoria or that it's a mental illness, then what are they actually saying when they say that person is under sin? Mm-hmm. And they use the DSM as that. Like,
it's the DSM stands for the Diagnostic and Statistical.
Yeah.
I always forget that. The S. I'm sorry. So, at what point is every mental illness then sin? And I think
right.
There are some conservative Christians that would say yes, that the reason you're in mental illness is because of sin. That because you're depressed, you don't have enough faith. I think is used often, very often. But if you don't believe that mental illness itself is sin, then that argument of, well, it's mental illness, therefore it's sin, does not hold up.
Right.
And then the next point as well that the author writes is that homosexuality has always been viewed as sin in a biblical and historical model. So has homosexuality always been viewed as sin?
No.
In the historical sense?
In the historical biblical model.
Well, in the historical biblical model, the ideas of sexuality that they're talking about, like in the New Testament, is when Paul lines up the words of "these people will not inherit the kingdom of God." Is that Corinthians? So
Yeah.
this list, right?
Hmm.
And that is taken, that translation of homosexuality is taken from the Septuagint, and that is like brought over from the Old Testament. So what do we know about that version of homosexuality? It had to do with dominance, and so it's
Hmm.
lined up with like if you could say, one person can't dominate another person, or one person can't treat another person with such dominance. So
Hmm.
the idea of homosexuality in the Old and the New Testament um, is much different than same-sex relationships.
Correct. It's about power. It's about control. It's about who is acting upon whom,
Right.
and one person has to take the subordinate position, and especially, and this is why this is mostly a male argument, that as males, and I don't think that even scripture talks about female on
No,
female at
man lies
all.
with man.
Mm-mm.
Right.
And so it's the idea of who was supposed to be in the top order of power and dominance, that somebody gave up theirs, but that person who gave it up in scripture is always seen as the victim,
Right.
and the person that acted upon is seen as the victimizer.
Yeah,
And
the idea
go
of, well, I think that probably same-sex relationships, or at least attraction, or just more of an intimacy between same-sex, that's probably since the beginning of time. Yet what's being talked about when you say the historical biblical model, right? When you use that language,
mm-hmm.
I have to say, well, what is talked about in the Bible? And what's talked about in the Bible is rape. What's talked about in the Bible is dominance. And what is talked about in the Bible is pederasty. And pederasty was when a leader, or a male leader, had a young boy. And that, of course, was seen as dominance as well. So you have two or three, I guess, versions in the historical biblical model that really don't line up to what we see today, or really in modern history of what
Yeah,
we see as
we view sex as
homosexuality.
an action between two equal partners,
Right,
usually
Right.
right.
consenting
Unless it does
partners.
fall
We'll
into
we'll
one of
say
those
consenting
categories.
partners.
Right,
And what they point to as well, that means death if for both parties, that they would put them to death. But if you read that whole list, there's a lot more that was put to death besides just that.
right.
And so we're very fixated on sexual sin.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we're fixated on sexual sin, but that really we're only fixated on two things in Christianity. And the two things are abortion and LGBTQ plus, and right now, gender affirming ideologies of LGBTQ plus. So, and I use gender affirming ideologies because that's what the evangelical Christian is calling that right now. Um, and so they're kind of classifying it as this other human idea. By saying it's an ideology of this class of people is kind of like grouping that person as an other. So 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 those are the two issues. Now, do I understand why it like is a big issue? Oh, well, I think that we've never probably really had to face the conversation before. And so it's new, right? And anything new, Christians really struggle with anything new. Um, but honestly, if you look at like, just to be honest, like if you look at some of the agenda that has been pushed through, policies that have been pushed through, Roe v. Wade being turned over, 34 anti-trans bills hitting the federal floor in 2023, 21 passing since the beginning of the year. According to like the conservative agenda, they're making progress in these areas. So I think that they almost have like a skewed like version, like a reality of what's really happening in the world. And so to be so fearful of a person that's just flesh and blood, right? To be fearful of a person is really, I don't know, quite sad to me.
So I think I'll skip this next question and go to the final one.
Okay.
This person said that Jesus' primary work on earth is the forgiveness of sin. Was Jesus' primary work on earth the forgiveness of sin?
I don't think so. Something I've noticed as I've read through the Gospels is that really the only time Jesus does any forgiving is when Jesus is also healing some sort of physical malady. And I'm definitely not willing to say that any kind of disability is the result of sin.
What?
I don't think Jesus was forgiving the sin that caused blindness or whatever. I think what was going on there is that these disabilities would disconnect people from community, would restrict their ability to participate in community as a full member. And so when Jesus is forgiving, that had to do with, I think, other people's perceptions. So other people would perceive this person as sinful because of their disability. And so when Jesus heals them and says your sin is forgiven, not only is he taking away that physical barrier, but he's taking away that social barrier that's keeping them from being part of the community. So it's not some mystical, spiritual thing that Jesus did to make this person right with God. It's about restoring them back to community.
Yeah, very good. Thank you.
I think that was part of Jesus's work. I would say that if you look at covenant theology, Jesus and the life of Jesus, the death, burial, resurrection of Jesus, goes along the same like pattern as the covenant, and that's why Jesus in the final hour said this is the new covenant. So Jesus and the primary work was to establish the new covenant. And this is why the restorationists say no creed but Christ, no law but love. Right? Because there's nothing else really that Jesus did besides usher in the covenant of love. And in order to accomplish that, sin was forgiven.
Destroyed or forgiven?
I think sin was forgiven. It does say sin was forgiven. And I would say evil, like chains of evil, or any metaphor that you can think of, that idea that the adversary had now still have power over us, that was destroyed. So this idea, but one of the works that Jesus brought in, like a part of his greater purpose, was the year of Jubilee, that all captives would be set free, all debts would be paid, all land would go back to the original owner. So just think of that in a metaphor sense. Okay. So some people look at Jesus and the year of Jubilee as a literal sense, but that would be the let's say it was just metaphor, right? The metaphor is beautiful, that all people that are bound to another, that fall under the law, that are captive, they're enslaved, that are all of those people in their hearts and their minds can now live a free life, in Christ. So part of it is setting the captives free. Call that forgiving sin. Part of it is establishing the new covenant and the law of love. But also, when Jesus gave these I am statements, that I am the way, the truth, and the life, is, Jesus didn't live so we didn't have to. Jesus lived so we knew how to. And so Jesus gave us a way, a truth, and a life. And that's the way we are to live. So not only did he give us a covenant, not only did he set us free, but he also gave us a way of life. I think the problem that I find with the letter is he's calling somebody out on what he perceives as sin. And he's trying to dig down that trail. But yet Jesus actually was the one that would have walked up to that individual and called him in sin.
Yes. Pharisees. The idea of what Jesus' main purpose, and it was to create life as a safe space. We'll say it that way. That wherever you are, a safe space is around you, no matter if that person that needs the safe space is in sin or not. That our job is not to call them out, judge, or even convict them. I think we talk about the Holy Spirit's main job is that, and that's not yours. So just love them, let them be. The story I go back to, especially with this topic, is Jesus healing this centurion's boy. And in the story, the centurion comes up, says it is his boy, his slave, we like the word slave, is fallen ill, and he would like his slave to be healed, that he has faith that Jesus can do that. And so Jesus says, your faith is better than anyone else's, basically. Your slave has been healed, go home. A real rendering of those words would be, my male sex slave that I have, this child, has fallen ill. And nowhere did Jesus say, don't go and sin anymore. I won't heal you because you're in sin. You need to completely eradicate that from your life. And then took care of the emotion first, took care of the person, and another day it may be different. That's what I got.
Well, I think that we have a lot to learn about how to treat people, whether a listener right now agrees or not with the theology of like a conservative Christian what they call sexual ethic, whether you agree with that or not, right? We're going to have to figure out as Christians how to love people despite our views of their behavior. Because 10 years or 20 years from now, there's going to be a new behavior that's new, and we can't, what are we going to do now? And so that's part of the challenge here, is that Christians have never been good at treating people as human beings, not as objects. And the moment that we can treat people as human beings, I think the moment that is like a breakthrough moment. That's like a Jesus breakthrough. That wow, we're going to treat the person at the well, and we're going to treat the person that's on the ground, and we're going to treat the paralytic man, and we're going to treat, the person with the skin disease, and we're going to treat all these people with just respect and human being, and help them establish, like Sharia says, help them into community. And there were lots of views of people's behavior back then, but Jesus walked around and just purely loved people. And we're to model that in our lives. So I look at this letter and I looked at what happened with that. And I think, well, it just shows a huge lack of grace. It shows a huge lack of love. And honestly, if we can't use people in service for people, I don't know what we're going to use to minister to people if we can't figure out how to use people. But this is one of the reasons why the evangelical church is what some people say is in crisis, but the numbers are just dropping so dramatically, is because we just can't figure out how to love people. And that's unfortunate. It's really unfortunate that we're there. And
keep running out the good people.
What?
Keep running out good people.
Oh, we just keep running off people like left and right. And I think
Stop
I read this.
emails.
What?
Stop sending emails.
Right. It does say in the Bible that if you think somebody has sinned against you, you go to them and sit down with them and have a conversation. So I think that our going back to letter writing, I think that letter writing, we can attack people and from a distance, and it seems easier and creates much, much damage. That email is very damaging, I think. Shows a huge lack of grace, lack of love, lack of mercy. There's just nothing in it that speaks forgiveness or any form of like you're a human being, I'm a human being. Let's start there. There's nothing like that in the email. Yeah. All right. Well, let's go over the last topic. We got about 10 more minutes. And so I do want to talk about this. Months and months ago, one of the musicians at our church came to me with this YouTube video. And he says, "Hey, have you seen this YouTube video? It's called Satan's Guide to the Bible." And I just looked at it. I didn't think anything of it. I saw that it was an hour and 45 minutes. And I was like, wow, that's a long video. I don't got time for that. I opened it up. I didn't even look at it besides starting to listen to it. Right. And it brought up some arguments and such. And then I never went back to it. Right. I had talked about those arguments before. We had unpacked those on this podcast before. And so it was kind of like, it wasn't old news, but it was just kind of rehashing some things. Anyway, so I'm on one of the social media channels here recently, a handful of months ago, or a month ago, I guess now, and pops up Satan and the Satan's Guide to the Bible. I don't know if we have a picture of it or not, Jake, if you wanted to show that picture. But it's just called it's a YouTube video called Satan's Guide to the Bible. And I looked a little closer and I went, oh my goodness, that is so funny. So I had a friend or a classmate in high school by the name of Zeke Pystrip. He's the producer of Satan's Guide to the Bible. We were in the same class together. We were in high school together and such, part of junior high. And anyway, so Zeke was Zeke. Zeke, I think, came from a kind of a family of producers or music and such. And so he has kind of been in this vein for a long time. And he was the one that produced the video of Harold Camping. He got an exclusive video with Harold Camping, the guy that predicted the end of the world, and we're still here. So Harold Camping and Zeke Pystrip did an exclusive documentary of the life after the prediction and why these things happen. Anyway, his interest has been in a lot of just church or theology or the drama around church. I've seen some different things from him over the years about church. Anyway, Satan's Guide to the Bible. It has actually reached 1.1 plus million views on YouTube. It is kind of going viral. And what I also find interesting is Satan's Guide to the Bible has gotten a lot of feedback. The rebuttals have been very interesting to watch. And so this is how the documentary goes. Satan's Guide to the Bible is basically like, you just think the title, it's like, oh my goodness, what could this be about? It is I think a surprisingly funny video. I found it funny.
Very funny.
I just, it was kind of lighthearted. It was very lighthearted to the complexities of the Bible, mostly the composition of the Bible. And so Satan is actually, it's a very like familiar old school scene where we have these children, and these children are there for Sunday school and their teacher is out sick or gone or whatever. So
Can
the
you see it now,
substitute
Kevin?
teacher comes in, and the substitute teacher is Satan, right? And so Satan starts teaching Sunday school. You can see that Satan is this like debonair looking guy with, he's like in his 50s or whatever, sitting there teaching these kids about the Bible. Now, does it feel a little creepy? Yes, we have these kids in Sunday school with Satan. And so I think that was on purpose to make it feel creepy, because the church has been creepy. And
But the
so
kids look angry except for a couple of them, which is funny.
yes, yeah. So they're very, this contingency, I don't know if they're a homeschool contingency or whatever, but they only have learned this version, this historical version of the Bible, that the Bible is actually a historical document, right? And so he is breaking down the historicity or the thought that the Bible is this historical account of how the world, or how the history of the world kind of played out. And it doesn't get necessarily bogged down, I don't think, in theological complexity. It definitely is funny. It's lighthearted. But I think that what it does a couple of things, which I'm really proud of Zeke for doing it, because he does bring up complexities of the Bible that most people are not talking about today. He brings up some things that I have studied for years, that I'm like, wow, you actually brought these to the forefront. I don't have challenges talking about the things that he was talking about in front of congregations of people. He does talk about inerrancy, and how inerrancy is just kind of what I would say is it's just a fake doctrine. It's not even a real.
Inerrancy is errant.
Right. And so he does bring up inerrancy. He does bring up things that we have in this podcast, like Exodus doesn't have any archaeological evidence around it, right?
Or the conquest, or David,
or the conquests, or going into the promised land, or Abraham. Was Abraham this actual person? Was it a concept? Where he doesn't go, which is, it's a video. It had a purpose. It's an hour and 45 minutes long, but he only had an hour and 45 minutes. So he could have probably added another, 10 hours of material to the video.
This is
if
our
he talked
170th podcast, so we have 170 hours if we want to go for it.
or more into these kinds of concepts. So he's just trying to, like, I guess, nudge people, like push people into more of an understanding. I have no idea where his faith is. I don't know if he believes in God. He's agnostic, atheist, whatever. It does feel like a little bit. So the critique that I have of it, and maybe it's for just length of video, when you're bringing up complex theological arguments, there's I would say more complex answers to complex arguments, and there are other arguments that are around it. Now, I would say that the historical argument doesn't carry a lot of water. So if you're just battling the historical argument that the Bible is a piece of history and all these things happened, that's pretty easy to break down in an hour and 45 minutes. But I do think that there's a little more nuance to the complexities, to the composition of the Bible. The jumps, I guess to say, because it didn't historically happen, the Exodus is not a real story, or to actually like make that jump that almost it doesn't matter. I would say that there's lots of literature that we have that we consider sacred, that are not historical, yet they really do matter. So the jump of just because something's historical and what people have done with it and abused people with it, I think we need to be very careful to make that jump to, okay, it doesn't matter and the Bible is just a bunch of bunk, and that kind of stuff. Because I actually agree with a lot of what he said about Bible composition, uh, and that it wasn't like necessarily written by a single author, that it was written over a long period of time, and it wasn't even written by the people that it said, like Mark didn't write Mark and Matthew didn't write Matthew, those kinds of things. And so we all kind of agree with that here on this podcast, and we understand that. Yet I think I'm going to go back to what Pete Enns said a long time ago. Is he said, I think it's time to stop arguing and hammering what the Bible is versus what the Bible does.
Hmm.
And what the Bible is, I think, is a beautiful narrative, is a beautiful story. It has a lot of spiritual meaning, application. It has a lot of pointing, like it points me to different realities about God, and about the divine in general. But to try to like make that carry more water or make that carry more weight in my life, I have to make it a historical accounting. I think that just breaks down for me. But the Bible still does matter a lot to me. Um, what he does, I guess, is uh, he does break down some very traditional evangelical thoughts, and I think it's really important. I'm not an evangelical. My movement is not traditionally seen as evangelical. So I don't have some of these evangelical thoughts. So when I listen or you listen to the rebuttal to Satan's guide to the Bible, um, I would say most of those people are trying to defend a position that they've taken in evangelicalism. And now there is one thing though. There is one thing. I learned most of these things after seminary. So Zeke, if you ever listen to this, here you go. You said in the video, or your producer said in the video, that pastors are here trying to keep secrets. Um, I would push back a little bit on that and say most pastors in the circles that I've run in evangelicalism wouldn't even know how to address the topics that you're bringing up. Many, 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 many pastors didn't learn some of those concepts, didn't know some of those concepts, because in seminary, depending on what seminary you go to, they usually only teach or the academic curriculum only revolves around their version or their ideas of it. So if you go to a Calvinistic school, you're going to get their version of Calvinism, and then all the other things, kind of, right?
Hmm.
So you're going to get like a heavy version of Calvinism and then a sprinkle of the other. So just like I went to seminary, and some of the things that I learned from Jürgen Moltmann or Brueggemann, Walter Brueggemann, about the things that Zeke you're talking about in this video, that that uh that I learned some of those things, but I went to a school that was open to talking about those things more. And so there are many pastors, I think, don't know some of these things, and they're not educated. Now, is that an excuse? Absolutely not, because we have a world of information that we can tap into, and people are seeing the smoke that is before them and the mirrors that they have been played tricks with, that all of a sudden they're waking up because they Googled something and they find out a completely different version than their past. So I think that Satan's Guide to the Bible for me is good job, Zeke, for waking up a whole group of pastors that needed to be woken up to start addressing some of the things that you're talking about here. So I actually appreciated it. I liked it. I thought it was funny. It was entertaining. It was an entertaining exploration of some of these things. It was produced well, getting a lot of feedback. It's getting a lot of criticism, which, you start listening to it and you go, wow. Like I highly respect some of the theologians and the biblical scholars that he put on the video. But yeah, so that's Satan's Guide to the Bible. That's what I kind of dug around with this week, and I appreciated the hour and a half or whatever it was. So any thoughts on what I brought up?
I mean, hopefully it just pushes people to read content outside of or ingest content, not
Yeah.
read it, but ingest content out of their normal sphere of influence. And I think that we have buckets that we go back to just because it's safe and feels like home.
Yeah.
But step into a different pool one day.
And
Yeah.
in good faith, and not for the purpose of trying to prove it wrong,
Yeah.
but to actually
Yeah.
listen to the argument, try it on for a few hours, see how it fits.
Yeah.
Yeah. Unless your way of learning it is to prove it wrong and then come back to it again.
Try to prove it wrong, try to rip it apart.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And hopefully have a humble posture when you're there.
Yeah. I think that the deconstruction that I've gone through over the last handful of years of some of these things that Satan's Guide to the Bible brings up, hell, inerrancy, did Exodus happen? Did the flood happen? The apocalyptic nature of the New Testament, all of that. Did that destroy, or did I lose my faith? There's a lot of people who have, and there's a lot of people who, and I read like under the comments of Satan's Guide to the Bible, under the YouTube comments, I read a lot of comments that people had deconstructed to atheism. They deconstructed to just walking away from, quote, faith. And I think that's a bummer. That's a real bummer, because my deconstruction has pressed me in more to a God that I more understand and can understand. And it's pressed me in more to loving God even deeper and having actually a more sensitive nature to people, and more loving nature to people versus just trying to keep intact a version. And it's made me very open in front of people to talk about that, and people have appreciated that for the most part. I think some people that can't handle certain things, they can't handle it, and they, find other churches, I guess.
That's okay.
But, and that's okay. But to actually talk about deconstruction in front of people and to talk about, well, okay, here's the reality of these stories. But what can we garner from the stories? What can we get from these stories? I think that the nature of and the beauty of the story of Jonah is a lot greater than some historical value of Jonah. And so I think that spending time in those spaces, I think, is rich and good and actually helpful. So that's no secret in our church. There's no Bible secrets in our church, I don't think. But as I find out more, if I discover a new Bible secret, I'll definitely share it with the congregation. Anyway, those are my thoughts on Satan's Guide to the Bible. I really would one day like a conversation with Zeke Pystrip about it, because I think that we could have kind of a good conversation about the different concepts,
Mm-hmm.
because we do align on a lot of them. All right. I think that's what we have time for. And any other concluding thoughts on anything? We talked about laziness isn't a thing. We talked
Laziness,
about,
letters, and Satan's Guide to the Bible.
yeah, there we go. Jeez. Well, those are the things that we just kind of went through over the last couple of weeks, and especially this last week. And we wanted to talk about them with you openly. So if you have any comments, share them with us. We want to engage with you. Any thoughts on what we shared, we welcome them. Anything that you are exploring, we're going to put some links in the show notes to help direct you to some of the things that we are talking about. And so thanks for joining me, Shreya and Jake, in this conversation. And with that, good night,